Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a world where basic necessities are just effortlessly abundant.
Right.
Where goods and services can be produced pretty much on demand at almost no cost. What happens next? I mean, what becomes of money, work, value?
Yeah.
All of it.
It really does sound like science fiction, doesn't it?
It totally does.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive is custom tailored for you, our curious listener. We're drawing from the articles, the research, the notes you shared with us. Our mission today is basically to give you a shortcut, a way to get truly well informed about a future that honestly might not be that far off. It's already being shaped by technology. We're going to dive into the really intricate economic implications of a post-scarcity universe. We're talking about a future that could redefine, everything we understand about human endeavor, about societal structure. It's huge.
And to really set the stage for this mind-bending journey, it's super important to understand what we actually mean by post-scarcity, at least in the context of our sources.
Good point. It's not just everything's free, is it?
Not exactly. We're not necessarily talking about some, utopia where every single wish is granted instantly or where resources aren't literally infinite. That's not quite it. Instead, our sources tend to define it as a future where, for most people anyway, that nagging anxiety about basic needs.
Yeah, like food, housing.
Exactly. Food, shelter, energy, healthcare. That anxiety is simply gone. Why? Because of sheer availability, because of incredibly advanced technology. And this is such a profound conceptual leap because, well, as we all know, the entire field of economics, the way we've practiced it for centuries, is fundamentally built on scarcity.
Right. Limited resources, unlimited wants. That's Econ 101.
Precisely. It's all about allocating limited resources to satisfy those unlimited wants. So if that fundamental premise shifts, if scarcity isn't the main problem for basic needs, then everything else has to shift with it. We're going to explore how this seismic change could impact pretty much every facet of our lives.
Okay, so let's start digging into what post-scarcity really means. Because I think, like you said, it's often misunderstood. People hear it and they instantly picture, Star Trek replicators, everything free, no effort.
That's the common image, yeah.
But your sources suggest it's a bit more nuanced than that, more like a spectrum, maybe, than just an on-off switch.
Absolutely. That perception of, instant, effortless utopia is where many kind of miss the mark. The core info from our sources really emphasizes that post-scarcity isn't some simple yes-no state. It's more like a wide range of fluid conditions that a civilization might achieve over time. The key idea is that people no longer have to worry constantly about their basic needs being met. That's due to the sheer availability of resources, or maybe more accurately, the tech, to produce those resources on demand. But here's the catch, the nuance you mentioned. It seems to come in degrees, and it applies to different domains. So, a society might achieve incredible abundance in, say, energy, fusion power, massive solar farms, whatever. Or maybe food production gets totally automated, making hunger just a horrible memory.
Right.
Yet that same society could still grapple with scarcity in other areas. Maybe desirable housing in prime locations is still super competitive. Or think more abstractly. Maybe there's a scarcity of status or meaning or even just attention.
So the scarcity doesn't disappear, it just moves up the pyramid, like Maslow's hierarchy.
Exactly like Maslow's hierarchy. Many of our sources reference that framework. Even if you have virtually limitless material resources covering the physiological and safety needs at the bottom, those higher order needs, belonging, esteem, self-actualization, they often remain just as elusive, maybe even more intensely sought after because people have the time and energy to focus on them.
That makes sense.
And another key point, these states aren't necessarily permanent. They can shift. Think about a place with abundant land initially.
Like settling a new continent, or maybe a planet someday.
Yeah, exactly. First settlers have tons of space, tons of resources, but as the population grows, technology advances, that land fills up. Suddenly, each front property or that spot with the great view becomes incredibly scarce. New forms of social and economic competition emerge around that scarcity. So post-scarcity isn't some fixed, idyllic destination where all problems just vanish. It's more of a dynamic condition that redefines what is scarce.
That's a really profound thought. What we value changes. So if it's not simply everything is free, then what does happen to economics itself? Because like we said, the very definition is built on limited resources and unlimited wants. Does the whole field just pack up and go home? become a hobby for historians.
Not at all. And this, I think, is maybe the most truly mind-bending insight from the sources we looked at. Scarcity doesn't vanish. It just shapeshifts. It changes its form. Traditional economics, yes, is about allocating limited resources. But when those limits are radically altered or maybe even removed for basic goods, the field doesn't disappear. It evolves. It starts focusing on new kinds of limits.
Like what?
Well, the discussion seems to shift away from managing shortages of, say, grain or steel and moves towards navigating things like preferences, complex logistics, and really crucially, social meaning. Value stops being primarily about what's physically rare, and it starts being about what's deeply personally meaningful. And that's inherently subjective, it's personal, it's incredibly diverse.
Can you give an example?
Sure, let's take energy. Imagine a future with abundant, clean fusion power. Or maybe vast solar rays beaming energy down from orbit. Electricity becomes incredibly cheap, maybe, 1,000th of today's cost.
Sounds great. Free energy.
Well, not quite free in the sense of being without any economic considerations.
Yeah.
It still needs complex transmission grids, right? It needs regulation, massive storage solutions for when demand peaks or the sun isn't shining, intelligent management systems, probably AI-driven.
Right.
Economic trade-offs still exist. They're just different. Maybe the trade-off is deciding whether to prioritize beaming that cheap energy to a new Martian colony.
Oh, yeah.
Or ensuring absolutely uninterrupted power for all the megacities back on Earth during a rare but potentially devastating global solar storm. You still have choices, allocations.
I see. And food.
Same idea. Advanced automation, maybe vertical farms stacked high, sophisticated biotechnology. Hunger could genuinely become a distant memory.
Amazing.
But let's be honest, no matter how perfectly nutritious some nutrient paste from a synthesizer might be.
Yeah, not appealing.
Right. People will still value unique, culturally significant meals. They'll want the artisanally prepared dish, the irreplaceable human touch of grandma's secret recipe cooked in a real kitchen. Nobody's really lining up for the Soylent Green buffet every single night, are they? The value there isn't just the calories, it's the experience, the culture, the connection.
That distinction between cost and value feels absolutely central here, doesn't it? So the sources are suggesting that markets won't vanish either.
Seems unlikely, yeah.
But they'll become a lot less about pricing, apples and oranges, and a lot more about managing things like attention, identity, unique experiences, maybe even personal fulfillment.
That seems to be the direction.
Even in a world where physical goods are trivial to replicate, like you can easily fabricate a perfect copy of a designer chair, atom for atom, in your living room. Originals will still remain scarce just by definition, right?
Sure.
A hand-painted portrait by a recognized master, the genuine article from a specific historical period, may be assigned first edition of a beloved book.
Those things have inherent uniqueness.
Exactly. They hold immense non-replicable value and experiences too. Like being the only person with the front row seat at the Supernova Symphony.
Aha, nice one.
You can't copy that.
Yeah.
So economics evolves, it seems, from managing needs to negotiating meaning.
That's a great way to put it. Negotiating meaning.
Which really makes you wonder about human motivation itself.
Yeah, that brings us to a really fundamental question, doesn't it? If survival isn't the main driver anymore, if basic needs and maybe even a lot of luxuries are just available on demand, what does get us out of bed in the morning? What replaces, hunger and hardship as the engine of civilization?
It's a core question. For almost all of human history, work was just an absolute necessity. You had to toil for food, build shelter, ensure your security, and these things always came with a tangible price, whether you measured it in coins or calories burned or hours of labor.
Daily grind.
Exactly. So if that fundamental economic pressure is lifted, what then? Our sources point out that while, sure, some people might initially choose complete leisure, and who could blame them for a bit?
I take a long vacation for sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
But most people don't seem to do well long-term in what one source called a vacuum of meaning. We are, kind of by nature, creatures who seek out challenges, who need a sense of purpose. Pure idleness, for many, just becomes deeply unsatisfying pretty quickly. Yeah, you get bored. You want to do something.
Precisely. So the answer to what motivates us might actually be both ancient and strikingly modern. Things like status, passion, sheer curiosity. People will still strive for excellence, not because they have to for survival, but because they want to, deeply want to.
Can you give some examples?
Think of an artist who spends years, decades maybe, perfecting a sculpture, not for a commission, just for the sheer joy of creation, of expressing something.
Wow.
Or a scientist who dedicates their entire life to chasing some fundamental truth about the universe, driven purely by intellectual curiosity, not a paycheck.
Right. We see that already.
We absolutely do. One of our sources even noted how creators today might pour years into a passion project, writing a novel, building a complex indie video game, crafting an intricate web series long before they even think about how or even if it could be monetized. We see this drive everywhere. People often work way harder than they strictly need to just for that sense of purpose, because they want to matter, maybe they want to win, leave their mark on the world. That fundamental human drive isn't going to disappear, even in a world where nobody's starving and houses can, I don't know, literally pop out of nanofabricators. It just changes its target. The motivation finds new outlets.
So the goals shift, but the ambition, that drive, it remains. Some people will pursue really noble goals for the collective good, maybe solving climate change remnants or exploring the galaxy.
Yes.
Others might chase fame or power, maybe in new political arenas or social spheres. And I bet a lot of people might find themselves grinding away in really elaborate virtual economies or online communities.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just for fun, but for prestige, for influence, for that sense of accomplishment, even if it's just digital. In this kind of post-scarcity world, attention itself, that could become the new, super valuable, highly sought-after currency, couldn't it?
That's a very strong possibility highlighted in the sources.
Views, followers, likes, influence scores. We could easily see the rise of what one of our sources called an algorithmic aristocracy.
Ooh, that's a chilling term.
Isn't it? Where those who best capture and hold the collective attention wield disproportionate influence, maybe even real power.
And that, unfortunately, is where we start bumping into the potential risks, the new forms of inequality that could emerge. We're already seeing this dynamic play out today, right, on social media platforms that have basically gamified attention.
Totally. The dopamine hits from likes.
Exactly. People expend enormous effort, sometimes sacrificing their mental well-being, sometimes even compromising their morality, all in this relentless pursuit of likes, shares, subscribers, whatever the metric is. Now imagine if that dynamic becomes the primary engine of the new economy in a post-scarcity future. It could create new, maybe even more insidious forms of inequality, obsession, exploitation.
How so?
Well, you could have a world where everyone has enough food and shelter, sure, but only a tiny few have a voice that truly resonates, or the power to actually shape the collective reality because they control the attention flows. The very things that make us feel significant, being seen, being heard, contributing, could become the new battleground.
That's a sobering thought. Okay, so if survival isn't the main concern, what does this all mean for how society actually structures work? Or maybe contribution is a better word.
Yeah.
How does it distribute resources? Because even in a world of crazy abundance, things still need to be organized. Someone needs to decide who gets access to the really desirable experiences, or who takes responsibility for the less glamorous tasks that still need doing.
Precisely. Distribution and organization don't just vanish. Our sources outline several really fascinating models that different post-scarcity civilizations might adopt, not just for distributing goods or access, but also for structuring a sense of maybe duty or participation, just ensuring society still functions smoothly and people feel connected.
Okay, like what?
Well, one idea that comes up a lot is some form of universal basic income, or UBI.
Yeah, we hear about that now.
Right. But maybe not necessarily literal income in cash. It could be more like a guaranteed default resource package, a baseline of, say, housing, food, energy, digital access, just granted automatically to everyone. This baseline could be pretty basic, just ensuring dignity and security, or it could be quite abundant, depending on the society's values and the actual level of tech advancement. The key is it ensures nobody needs to work just to survive.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Another compelling model involves what some sources call contribution-based privileges.
Sounds potentially tricky.
It could be. The idea here is that certain luxuries, maybe advanced amenities, or even enhanced access to certain things might be tied to an individual's personal behavior, their positive contributions to society, maybe even their reputation score. So your access to, let's say, a personalized orbital vacation or priority access to some cutting-edge medical treatment might quietly scale with your sustained effort or your creativity or how cooperative you are within the community.
So Not forcing work, but rewarding contribution.
Exactly. The intent isn't to force people into labor out of necessity because the baseline is already there. It's more about maintaining social cohesion, rewarding positive actions, and maybe gently discouraging complete stagnation while still providing a generous floor for everyone.
Interesting. Are there other models?
Yeah, a couple more mentioned. Some cultures might even introduce nominal work weeks, meaning a very small number of required hours each week, maybe just a few. Definitely not the old 40-hour grind. And the requirement wouldn't be primarily for survival. It would be more about participation, giving citizens a sense of rhythm, identity, connection to their community, maybe even just a feeling of self-worth derived from contributing something structured. This also kind of implicitly addresses a potential societal reluctance to go full AI everywhere, leaving no meaningful roles left for humans.
Oh, like keeping people involved.
Right. And then there's an even more intriguing, maybe slightly cynical possibility, partially throttling AI or automation.
Deliberately slowing down progress.
Potentially. Officially, this might be justified by very legitimate fears, runaway intelligence, system fragility, ethical concerns, and those could be real. But unofficially, it could serve a crucial social function, preserving a sense of human purpose, ensuring there's a guaranteed chance for people to work, even if it's mostly voluntary work, just to earn those extra luxuries or simply to stay busy and engaged, kind of managing the transition psychologically.
Wow. Okay, so these different models, they still sound like functioning economies in a way.
They absolutely are. They're sophisticated. They're just focused on different things. Instead of earning basic survival, you're maybe earning higher tier luxuries or prestige or influence. And they can manifest in forms that still resemble capitalism or socialism or communism, or maybe, more likely, various hybrids we haven't even conceived of yet. Contributions to society, whether that's helping others, creating art, solving complex scientific problems, maybe even just acting as a really good community mentor, might be rewarded not just with some fungible currency,
Right.
but with prestige, social influence, or maybe even the power to direct collective resources because others trust you to use them wisely. The very concept of earning evolves beyond just money.
This brings up such a fascinating point, though. If money or traditional money isn't the main driver, how do we incentivize those really difficult jobs?
Yeah.
The dangerous ones, or maybe just the plain unpleasant ones that maybe can't be fully automated yet. And link to that, what happens to the whole concept of ownership itself when so much is just readily available?
Two huge questions there. On the first one, incentives for difficult tasks. Our sources emphasize that money, or at least some form of universally accepted value token, probably won't just disappear entirely. It might just operate under a different name, maybe a more abstract form of social capital or contribution credit. Why? Because people generally prefer something comfortable, fungible, universally accepted over pure bartering or, constantly having to track complex webs of personal favors owed.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
It does. But the challenge you raise is critical. What about those public projects or tasks that are genuinely unpleasant, high intensity, maybe dangerous, and just cannot be fully automated, at least not yet? We'd still need people for those roles. Think, maybe, space debris cleanup in orbit, deep sea research and crushing pressures, or even certain complex, emotionally demanding caregiving roles.
Right. Who wants to do that if they don't have to?
Exactly. You can't just throw traditional cash at these tasks if people fundamentally don't need money to survive comfortably. The leverage is gone. So the compensation model has to shift fundamentally. You have to consider what else you're incentivizing them with. For highly capable, trustworthy, motivated individuals needed for these roles, the compensation could become largely non-financial. Enhanced prestige, maybe special access to rare experiences or resources, perhaps an elevated level of trust and influence within society.
Like being recognized as someone who does the hard stuff.
Precisely. It could be accelerated access to a cutting-edge research facility for a scientist willing to work in a hazardous environment. Or maybe the ability to choose your own hours and team on a project of vital importance. Think of someone today volunteering for a grueling polar expedition for scientific discovery. They're not doing it for the paycheck. They're doing it for the inherent challenge, the contribution to knowledge, the unique experience, all of which elevates their status within their field.
Okay, I can see that. But this post-scarcity meritocracy, it sounds like it has pitfalls too.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point out several risks. Who gets to decide what counts as a valuable contribution? Does the motivation behind it, genuine altruism versus a calculated desire for social clout, actually matter? Or can it even be judged? How do you avoid what one source described as a potential tyranny of taste, or a cultural monoculture where only certain types of approved contributions get rewarded, stifling diversity and dissent?
Yeah, that sounds dangerous.
And the sources also note that even without direct financial pressure, survival incentives still matter, just in a different way. Without the basic fear of impoverishment hanging over everyone, people might become hesitant to implement necessary but unpopular changes. Or maybe they'd be reluctant to speak up about serious problems if doing so could jeopardize their social standing, their reputation score.
So it could lead to stagnation.
Or groupthink.
Yeah.
Potentially, yes. A society that's too comfortable might lose its edge, its ability to adapt or self-correct. Motivation doesn't disappear, it just changes its mechanisms. And those new mechanisms still need very careful, very ethical design to prevent them from becoming new forms of social control or leading to unforeseen negative consequences.
Okay, let's unpack that second part of the question then.
Yeah.
Ownership. If everything or almost everything material can be copied, if replication becomes essentially infinite, what does it truly mean to own something anymore?
Yeah.
Because traditional property, like you said, has always been defined by its limits. My house is mine because it's not yours. My car is mine. Only one person can drive it at a time. That whole paradigm seems to just evaporate.
That's a fantastic observation, and it cuts right to the heart of it. Traditional property, whether we're talking land, physical goods, commodities, has always been defined by its scarcity, by its inherent limits. You own something because someone else does not or cannot simultaneously possess or use it in the same way. But if something becomes infinitely replicable, I mean, if you can literally print an atom for atom identical copy of, say, a designer watch or a complex tool from your home fabricator in seconds.
Right, a perfect copy.
A perfect, indistinguishable copy. Then the very foundation of that ownership concept gets incredibly fuzzy, maybe even meaningless for that object. Our sources are very clear on this distinction. We're not talking about cheap knockoffs or inferior copies here. We're talking perfect, identical replicas. In that context, it's not really theft to use a design that's universally available and free to replicate. It's simply usage. It's not scarcity driving the value. It's replication without restriction. The economic value of that designer watch you just printed isn't the same if anyone, anywhere, can print an absolutely identical one instantly. The material object itself loses its specialness, its inherent scarcity value.
Okay, so when physical goods become trivial to replicate, what kind of property still matters? What actually endures in this new world where almost anything material can be duplicated at will?
It seems a few fundamental forms of property endure, and in fact, they might gain even more significance as the old forms based purely on material scarcity fade. The first, and perhaps the most obvious one, is location-based property.
Like land, real estate.
It's exactly. Land, desirable housing. Even if building materials become ridiculously cheap and replicators are everywhere, physical space itself remains inherently limited, at least within a given geography or biosphere. Unless humanity decides to, I don't know, live exclusively in infinite virtual spaces, or finds a way to colonize planets with truly unlimited habitable volume, prime real estate will still matter.
A house with a view is still a house with a view.
Precisely. A coveted spot in a vibrant city, maybe a specific patch of uniquely fertile agricultural land. Those things retain their scarcity. This is why discussions about building enormous space habitats or terraforming new worlds become so relevant in a post-scarcity context. They are, in effect, attempts to expand the very definition of location and thus create new forms of finite, desirable property.
Okay, location makes sense.
What else? The second enduring form seems to be personal identity and creative authorship. You might be able to copy a digital painting perfectly, pixel for pixel, or replicate a physical sculpture with flawless precision using nanobots. But there's still something inherently unique about the original creation. And maybe even more importantly, about who made it. Authorship, provenance, the history and origin of an object, and the narrative value embedded within it become the new scarcity.
The story behind it.
The story becomes paramount. You might be able to get any book or film instantly, maybe through some subscription access, but the experience of being the actual author or owning a unique, signed first edition of a work from an artist you deeply admire, that still holds immense personal meaning. In many cases, the story behind the object, its origin, the creator's intent, its journey through time, who owned it before, becomes far more important and valuable than the physical object itself.
That makes me think of, well, NFTs.
Exactly. Our sources even point to NFTs or non-fungible tokens as a really interesting, although yes, early and sometimes mocked, real-world example of this exact demand. Despite all the hype and occasional absurdity, NFTs illustrate a genuine human desire for unique digital ownership and verifiable provenance. People demonstrably care about who owns the official version of a digital artwork, or who was the first patron of a creator.
Why, though? Bragging rights?
Partly, perhaps, but also as a signal of taste, participation, early support within a particular community or movement. It's a social signal. Similarly, in a post-scarcity world, people might highly value being among the first to view a groundbreaking piece of art or write the inaugural review for a creator they helped influence. Seeing that influential role itself as a form of valued, non-replicable contribution, it's about participating in a unique moment in time.
Okay, so location authorship, is there a third?
Yes, the third enduring form seems to be access rights, potentially replacing direct ownership in many cases. Think about it. You might not need to own a private shuttlecraft when you can summon one instantly, on demand, whenever you need it.
Like a super advanced Uber.
Exactly. Or why own a private movie theater when you can access any performance, live or recorded, anywhere in the world, maybe holographically projected into your living room? The physical object, the shuttle or the theater, is no longer the key. But access itself can still be gated. It can be limited by time, by priority status, maybe by affiliation with a certain group.
So who gets the front row seats at that live holographic concert if there are only a limited number of premium spots?
Right. Who gets first access to test a groundbreaking new invention? Who gets to decide what artistic displays show up on the city's virtual skyline tonight? This subtly shifts the concept of property away from discrete things you possess towards more abstract concepts like experiences, control over systems, and earned prestige. Of course, some utopian visions in the sources suggest civilizations might try to abolish personal property altogether, making everything shared or public.
Sounds tricky.
Very. Because even then, someone is still deciding what gets shared, how it gets allocated, and who manages the system, which is simply a different form, maybe democratic, maybe bureaucratic, of collective ownership and control. It doesn't eliminate allocation decisions.
That's a lot to chew on regarding what we hold dear, what property even means. But if wealth itself changes form so drastically, if it's not primarily about owning physical assets anymore, what about the wealth we pass down through generations? What does inheritance even look like in an age where tangible goods are essentially free? And maybe, just maybe, life itself is extended indefinitely.
Oof. Yeah, this is where the concept of inheritance enters a whole new dimension of complexity and potential inequality. If physical goods are abundant, then yes, inherited material wealth might indeed lose much of its luster. A trust fund full of replicator credits might not mean much if everyone has access to the replicator. However, things like prestige, deep-seated family connections, privileged access to certain influential networks, maybe even advanced biological or cybernetic enhancements, those might not be so easily replicated or distributed.
So you inherit your family's reputation.
Or their network. Exactly. As our sources highlight, families already pass on so much more than just money. They pass on names, reputations, social networks, cultural capital, entrenched expectations. In a post-scarcity world, this kind of intangible legacy capital could become exponentially more influential and valuable. Grandparents might not leave you a house or stocks, but maybe a vast digital legacy, a huge social media following, access to curated, exclusive experiences, perhaps restricted archives of unique knowledge.
Or even genetic upgrades.
Or perhaps even, a suite of advanced biotech upgrade packages passed down, or maybe neural implant suites, giving descendants an immediate cognitive or physical advantage right from birth. That's a possibility raised.
Oh, wow.
Then there's the profound and frankly deeply unsettling challenge of widespread biological immortality, or at least radical life extension, which often comes up in these discussions. If that becomes common, the very idea of inheritance changes shape entirely. You might not inherit a fortune, but maybe you inherit a multi-millennial waiting list for a highly desirable role or position.
Because the person currently in it never actually retires or dies.
Precisely. Dynasties could potentially hoard power, influence, and prime positions almost indefinitely, unless society actively designs mechanisms to limit tenure or mandate turnover, maybe through forced sabbaticals or term limits that span centuries instead of years.
That sounds like a recipe for stagnation, or worse.
It raises the critical risk of what some sources call ossified inequality. Abundance might not erase inequality. It might simply solidify and entrench it in new, potentially far more intractable forms. Not through hoarding gold bars, but through monopolies on opportunity, on collective memory, maybe even on time itself.
Imagine a senator serving their 50th consecutive term.
Or a university professor tenured for 5 centuries, potentially holding onto a position even if they're no longer the most productive, innovative, or representative person for the role. It raises incredibly deep questions about meritocracy and social mobility when some individuals start life with inherent upgrades, immense social capital, or deeply entrenched advantages that can be passed down across millennia.
So ownership doesn't disappear.
It just changes its clothes, basically. It evolves from material possessions to intangible advantages, access, influence, maybe even biological potential. The conversation about property in a post-scarcity world thus becomes a much deeper, far more urgent conversation about what we truly value as a society. What do we choose to reward, respect, and protect from duplication, and why? These aren't just economic questions anymore. They become profoundly philosophical.
You know, whenever post-scarcity comes up in conversation, someone always says, oh, like Star Trek, right? They don't even have money anymore.
It's the go-to example for sure.
So let's connect this to that famous vision. Is that really how it works in Trek? And maybe more importantly, what does it tell us about these new economic realities we've been discussing?
It's a really natural connection to make, but honestly, it's a complicated one because the Star Trek canon, especially if you look across all the different series and films, is famously, well, contradictory when it comes to economics.
As a whole.
You have Captain Picard famously giving speeches about how humanity has evolved beyond the need for currency, how the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. Grand, noble ideals.
I remember those.
But then in other instances, particularly on shows like Deep Space Nine, you see characters constantly gambling with gold-pressed latinum at Quark's bar, haggling over transport fees, or occasionally mentioning Federation credits.
Right. So which is it?
The truth is, the Star Trek economy is probably best understood as more of a storytelling shorthand than a perfect, logically consistent logistical model. It's primarily meant to signal humanity's profound moral and social evolution beyond greed and class struggle, rather than presenting a perfectly worked out, robust economic system you could actually implement.
Okay.
It also makes some huge assumptions. Incredibly advanced technology, obviously think replicators that can create almost anything complex from raw energy, near unlimited power sources, easy matter energy conversion.
The magic tech.
The magic tech, exactly. And also, crucially, the backstory often implies a significantly lower human population due to devastating past wars, like World War III. This gives the Federation a lot of elbow room. Resources aren't stretched thin. There's plenty of space to expand. Real-world post-scarcity might not give us Earl Grey tea, hot, from thin air at a moment's notice.
Shame.
It is. But it does point towards a future where most basic goods are no longer constrained by traditional manufacturing limits or resource extraction in the same way.
So in their system, how does it work day to day if money is less important?
Well, in a system where nobody has to pay for basic housing, food, medical care, education, and you earn a prestigious position on a starship through merit and qualification, not by buying your way in, then traditional money for just day-to-day goods and labor does indeed become much less necessary for the average Federation citizen. Your basic needs are completely covered.
People still want things, right?
Absolutely. People still want things they don't necessarily qualify for under the standard system, or unique experiences they don't have access to, or maybe objects with special sentimental or historical value that can't just be replicated. And as soon as people start trading their time, their effort, maybe even their influence or access for these things, you either have money or you have something with a different name that serves essentially the same purpose.
Like Federation credits, or maybe even favors.
Could be. A fungible, universally accepted token of value tends to emerge because, let's face it, humans generally prefer something comfortable and easily exchangeable over pure bartering or constantly trying to track complex networks of personal favors owed. I owe you one, only scale so far.
Sure.
And even in the relative absence of traditional cash within the Federation core, incentives definitely don't vanish in Star Trek.
Right.
Far from it. Starfleet officers still strive intensely for excellence, for promotion. Scientists compete vigorously for prestige, for research grants, for discoveries. Captains vie for the best assignments, command of the latest starship.
So the drive is still there.
Absolutely. These incentives are just no longer primarily survival-based. They're fundamentally about identity, purpose, personal growth, contributing to something larger than oneself, doing something that matters for humanity. often even at the risk of their own survival, ironically. Joining Starfleet isn't about getting rich. It's about being part of this grand, meaningful, collective endeavor.
But there's still inequality, right? Not everyone gets to be Captain Kirk.
Definitely not. Even within the Federation, not everything is equal. Some officers get to command the flagship Enterprise, while others are assigned to remote, unglamorous outposts. That's a huge difference in experience and opportunity. And power structures clearly still exist. The Federation Council makes big decisions about resource allocation and policy. Starfleet Command decides who gets which commands. Individual captains still wield immense authority over their crews. Influence, access, opportunity, these are still unequally distributed. They're just not primarily denominated in cash within that specific context. So, the Star Trek economy is probably best viewed as a kind of high-trust, high-abundance society where basic needs are so thoroughly met that most citizens can afford to live without constantly worrying about money. But human nature, with its inherent drives for purpose, status, achievement, and power, ensures that dynamic remains, albeit playing out in new arenas and forms. And of course, external economies like the Ferengi still operate on very different principles right alongside them.
What's really fascinating there is how Star Trek, even with its utopian ideals, still highlights that persistent human element, the power dynamics that don't just go away.
Exactly.
But this feels like precisely the challenge we see playing out in our real world, attempts at building decentralized systems, even purely digital ones.
Yeah.
You take something like Bitcoin. It was supposed to usher in this new era of decentralized finance, decentralized mining, yet by many metrics, it's becoming increasingly centralized, isn't it?
You've absolutely hit on a critical and often quite counterintuitive point that comes up in the sources. Achieving, and then perhaps more importantly, maintaining true decentralization is a constant, ongoing challenge. It's not a one-time fix. Even in systems explicitly designed from the ground up to be decentralized, centralizing forces seem to creep back in. Bitcoin's proof-of-work consensus mechanism is a prime example.
How so? Explain that a bit.
Well, proof of work relies on solving complex computational puzzles. To be competitive, miners need immense processing power. This has inadvertently led to the dominance of massive mining pools, where thousands of miners pool their resources.
So individuals can't compete alone.
It's become incredibly difficult, yeah. And it's also led to the development of highly specialized hardware known as ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. These chips are designed to do one thing and one thing only: mine Bitcoin incredibly efficiently. This makes it very hard, if not economically impossible, for someone just using a regular computer or even a high-end graphics card to compete profitably anymore. This, in turn, has centralized the mining process itself, with a relatively small number of large pools and hardware manufacturers controlling a significant, sometimes worryingly large portion of the network's total hash power.
Okay, so Bitcoin maybe isn't the best example of sustained decentralization in practice.
It faces significant challenges, yes. However, it's not for lack of trying in the broader crypto space. Some alternative systems have actively worked to design against this kind of centralization. Monero, or XMR, for example, is often cited as a potentially more successful example, at least regarding decentralized mining.
What does Monero do differently?
It uses an ASIC-resistant algorithm called RandomX. It's specifically designed to favor general-purpose CPUs, the kind of processor you find in your everyday laptop or desktop computer. This dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for mining, hoping to distribute the network's hash power among a much wider, more diverse range of individual participants.
So it's trying to keep the playing field level.
Exactly. Think of Bitcoin mining maybe as a super competitive gold rush where only those with giant custom-built industrial gold dredges can really succeed long-term. Monero, in contrast, tries to ensure everyone basically has to use a standard shovel, making it more accessible. Similarly, Ravencoin, or RVN, uses an algorithm called Cowpow, which is also designed to be ASIC resistant and favors GPU mining using consumer-grade graphics cards. Again, the goal is democratizing the process by utilizing more widely accessible hardware.
Okay, so there are technical attempts to fight mining centralization. What about governance? Who decides the rules?
That's another crucial battleground for decentralization. Mining is just one aspect. Cardano, or ADA, offers a really interesting example here with its multi-layered governance system. Their explicit aim is to enable on-chain, decentralized decision-making for the future of the network. Through what they call their Voltaire-era rollout, ADA holders can delegate their voting power to elected delegated representatives, or DREPs.
Like a digital democracy.
Kind of, yeah. Or they can vote directly themselves on proposed changes to the network protocols or funding initiatives. It even includes plans for a formal digital constitution and a community-managed treasury to fund proposals that get approved by the voters. The idea is to move governance power away from a single core development team towards a more distributed, community-driven model.
But even with these designs, like Monero's ASIC resistance, are there still risks? Can centralization creep back in?
Oh, absolutely. Even for a system like Monero, which is specifically designed for decentralization, there are persistent risks that the community constantly has to monitor and counteract. The most significant and immediate is probably still mining pool centralization. Even with CPU-friendly algorithms, individual miners often find it more practical and reliable to join large mining pools.
Why that?
Because joining a pool gives them a consistent, albeit smaller, share of the rewards based on their contributed hash power, rather than waiting potentially a very long time to individually solve a block and get the whole reward, which might never happen for a small miner. It smooths out the income. But if a few large pools attract a disproportionate amount of the total hash power, they could theoretically collude or be compromised to launch a 51% attack, which would allow them to potentially manipulate transactions or censor the network. Monero has actually faced this threat in the past, and its community actively encourages mining on smaller pools to mitigate it.
Okay, pools are a risk. What else?
We also see potential for economic and infrastructure centralization. As any network gains popularity, it naturally attracts larger players. This could include commercial cloud mining operations or even sophisticated botnets, which can aggregate significant computational power even using CPUs. Furthermore, regulatory pressure, especially on privacy-focused features like Monero's, can lead to such cryptocurrencies being delisted from major centralized exchanges. This might inadvertently push users towards decentralized exchanges, or DXs, or other intermediary services, which then become new potential points of centralization and control.
And the human element, developers.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, there's always the human element in governance and development. Even with sophisticated on-chain governance mechanisms like Cardano's, the core development teams, simply by virtue of their deep expertise and historical influence, still hold significant sway over the direction of the project. An increase in popularity or maybe external pressures could attract new, perhaps more corporate or professional entities with different visions for the protocol. This could lead to disagreements, contentious debates, or even network forks if consensus can't be reached.
So it sounds like decentralization isn't really a state you achieve, but more like a constant process, a struggle.
That's a perfect way to put it. The key lesson from the sources seems to be that decentralization is not a static achievement you just build and then walk away from. It's an ongoing struggle, requiring constant vigilance, adaptation, and community effort to resist the persistent gravitational pull towards new forms of centralization, whether technical, economic, or social. It's less about building a perfectly decentralized system once, and more about continuously fighting to keep it decentralized against emerging threats.
That's a really powerful point about the need for constant vigilance. And it definitely raises an important question. If even these digital systems designed for decentralization struggle so much against these centralizing forces, what does that say about human societies historically? It really seems like a recurring pattern, doesn't it?
It absolutely is a pattern, and a really profound one. The sources suggest that the challenges we observe in trying to maintain decentralization in digital networks are, in many ways, just a microcosm of a much broader, longer historical struggle within human societies themselves. The centralization of power, wealth, and information has arguably been the dominant trend for much of human history, especially since the invention of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. It seems the very same forces that tend to pull digital networks towards centralization also operate powerfully within human interactions and social structures.
What are those forces generally?
Well, the sources point to several powerful, deeply ingrained reasons for this historical dominance of centralization. First, there are significant economies of scale and specialization. Just like large Bitcoin mining pools can operate more efficiently due to their massive scale, centralized human societies have historically been far more efficient in achieving certain large-scale goals. Think about the shift from small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands to sedentary agriculture. That required immense coordination of labor, resource management, irrigation systems, giving rise to specialized roles like rulers, priests, soldiers, administrators. And thus, centralized command structures emerged to organize these vast amounts of labor and resources effectively.
Right, you need coordination for big projects.
Exactly. Later, industrialization dramatically accelerated this trend with the rise of factories, concentrating capital, production, and labor for unprecedented levels of efficiency, leading to corporations and nation-states. Centralization often brings efficiency gains, at least initially.
Okay, efficiency. What else?
Second, there's a powerful, maybe even primal drive for efficiency and convenience in our daily lives. Centralized systems, whether we're talking about a blockchain protocol, a national government, or a massive tech corporation, often offer greater speed, consistency, and sheer convenience for the end user. A centralized government can, at least in theory, pass and enforce laws uniformly or build large-scale infrastructure like highways or power grids more efficiently than a fragmented collection of squabbling local councils.
Sure.
And look at the internet. It was initially designed with highly decentralized principles in mind. Yet where do most of us spend our time online? We've largely centralized our digital lives around a handful of massive platforms: Google for search, Meta for social connection, Amazon for commerce.
Why? Because they work well. They're easy.
Precisely. They offer unparalleled user experience, powerful search capabilities, seamless integration, sheer convenience.
Yeah.
Even as they accumulate immense power and vast amounts of our data, we naturally gravitate towards what's easy and effective, which often means centralized services.
Okay, efficiency, convenience. What's the third factor?
Third, there's the perennial problem of trust and security, especially in large anonymous groups. In societies that grow beyond a small tribe or village where everyone knows each other, it becomes incredibly difficult to maintain trust and achieve consensus purely through decentralized means. How do you enforce agreements? How do you resolve disputes fairly? Centralized authorities, whether they're kings, courts, police forces, often emerge historically as a necessary mechanism to enforce rules, resolve disputes impartially, or at least appear to, and provide a sense of security against both internal conflict and external threats. Pure, sprawling, decentralized governance, as some sources note, can easily lead to gridlock, endless debate, bureaucratic inefficiencies, or what's sometimes termed the veto problem, where getting anything done becomes a slow, contentious, and often impossible process because any small group can block consensus. Central authority offers decisiveness, for better or worse.
And the last one. You mentioned power.
Yes. And finally, perhaps most fundamentally, there's the inevitable human pursuit of power and wealth. This seems to be a central, recurring challenge reflected in both blockchain governance struggles and human societies throughout history. Individuals and groups are, it seems, often naturally motivated to gain influence, acquire resources, and secure advantages over others. And they frequently use whatever power they acquire to further consolidate their position, creating feedback loops. This dynamic is evident in the rise and fall of political and economic elites throughout history, from ancient empires to modern corporate oligarchies. And it strikingly mirrors the dynamics we see in things like Bitcoin mining, where initial economic advantages often create a winner-take-all or rich-get-richer effect, inevitably leading towards centralization of power and resources over time.
So it seems like decentralization, while it offers really appealing benefits like resilience, transparency, maybe fairness, it's often fundamentally at odds with these powerful, ingrained human tendencies towards efficiency, convenience, and the concentration of power. It's like swimming upstream, historically speaking.
That's a very good way to frame it. It's a constant tension, a constant struggle against these centralizing forces.
That paints a rather, well, a somewhat bleak picture for the long-term prospects of sustained decentralization, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if it's even possible if we're stuck in what seems like an inherent win-lose mentality, where it's always a struggle for dominance, for control. What if? What if we need a fundamentally different approach? Could we actually evolve towards a more genuinely win-win mentality, even within these complex technological and social systems?
You've touched upon a really key concept there, one that's being deeply explored now in fields like game theory, complex systems research, and even evolutionary biology. The insight is precisely that. Systems designed primarily around a zero-sum win-lose mentality, where participants are constantly competing against each other for a finite prize or resource, almost inevitably tend towards centralization over time. The most powerful players, those who start with more resources or get lucky early on, will eventually accumulate more advantage, leading to a concentration of control. It's almost a mathematical tendency.
Like in Bitcoin mining again.
Bitcoin is a good example, yes. While it was revolutionary in using game theory, it's largely built on non-cooperative game theory, specifically aiming for a Nash equilibrium. In this model, self-interested participants are incentivized to behave honestly only because it's in their own best individual interest to do so to get the reward. But this inherently competitive dynamic, where miners are in a constant cutthroat race to solve a cryptographic puzzle for a block reward, often leads to exactly the kind of mining pool and ASIC centralization we discussed. The most powerful and well-resourced players simply outcompete the others over time. It's win-lose at its core.
So how do you get to win-win?
Evolving toward a true win-win or positive-sum mentality means consciously designing systems that actively promote cooperation alongside, or even above, pure, unfettered competition. It's about creating environments where an individual participant's success is directly and visibly tied to the success, health, and growth of the entire network or community. Their win contributes to everyone else's win.
Can you give an example of that in practice?
Absolutely. A prime example emerging in the digital realm is public goods funding mechanisms built into some blockchain protocols. In systems like Ethereum, for instance, or other Layer 1 networks, a small portion of network transaction fees, or perhaps funds from a dedicated community treasury, are automatically allocated to projects that benefit the entire ecosystem.
Like what kind of projects?
Things like developing crucial open-source software libraries that everyone can use, improving the core network infrastructure, funding security audits, or supporting educational initiatives that bring more people into the ecosystem. This creates a clear win-win dynamic. It incentivizes talented developers and contributors to create tools and resources that are freely available and benefit everyone, not just themselves or their specific company. And it ensures the network as a whole grows stronger, more secure, and more valuable because of these collective contributions. It's a direct investment in shared infrastructure, creating positive externalities.
Okay, that makes sense. Investing in the commons. Any other examples?
Yes. Another powerful example can be found in many proof-of-stake, POS consensus mechanisms, particularly those with robust delegation models. In POS networks, entities called validators are rewarded for securing the network by staking or locking up their own cryptocurrency as collateral. But crucially, everyday users who hold the currency but maybe don't want to run a validator themselves can delegate their stake to these validators.
And they get something for that.
Yes. The delegators earn a portion of the rewards generated by the validator they support, while the validator gains more influence, more voting weight, and potentially earns slightly more from managing a larger delegated stake. This creates a direct positive-sum game where all participating parties benefit. The delegators earn passive income for helping secure the network, and the validators earn more by providing a reliable, trustworthy service. A healthy delegation market also encourages competition among validators based on factors like reliability, security practices, community engagement, and reputation, rather than just raw computational power or the sheer amount of capital they control. This can significantly help prevent a few large entities from monopolizing the network, as their ongoing success explicitly depends on maintaining the collective trust and participation of many smaller stakeholders.
So it aligns incentives towards cooperation.
It attempts to, yes. In conclusion, the sources suggest that true, sustainable decentralization requires more than just clever competitive game theory. It absolutely needs these kinds of sophisticated cooperative mechanisms that actively build and maintain a win-win environment for all participants. It's about fostering symbiosis, not just survival of the fittest.
That's a really powerful and honestly quite elegant idea, deliberately shifting the design focus from pure competition towards enabling cooperation. It really is like moving from a world of single-celled organisms all fighting for scraps to a complex multicellular organism where cells cooperate for the good of the whole body.
That analogy is absolutely spot on. Several sources actually draw that parallel, and your intuition is hitting precisely at the core challenge identified. The evolutionary leap from relatively simple single-celled life to complex multicellular organisms provides a perfect biological illustration of exactly this principle. Win-win strategies based on cooperation and specialization are ultimately far more successful and capable in the long run, but they demand a profoundly higher level of complexity, organization, and crucially reliable cooperation.
How so?
Well, think about a single-celled organism like bacteria. It operates with a purely win-lose mentality, right? It competes fiercely with its neighbors for available resources, focused solely on its own individual survival and rapid reproduction. It's simple, incredibly effective at its scale, but inherently limited in what it can achieve. The transition to multicellularity, however, which happened independently multiple times in Earth's history, required nothing short of a radical evolutionary shift towards a win-win strategy. Individual cells had to effectively give up their immediate independent reproductive rights and subordinate their own replication for the collective benefit of the larger organism. This allowed for incredible specialization and intricate cooperation.
Like different cells becoming muscle or nerves.
Exactly. Some cells became muscle for movement, others neurons for communication, others formed protective skin, others became part of a complex immune system, each performing a dedicated role that benefited the whole. This cooperative system, while exponentially more complex, requiring intricate genetic programming to coordinate development, sophisticated signaling pathways between cells, multi-layered organizational structures like tissues and organs, results in an organism that is far more resilient, adaptable, capable, and ultimately successful than any single-celled competitor could ever hope to be in many environments. It's a triumph of cooperation creating emergent complexity.
But there's a catch, isn't there? Like cancer.
Precisely the catch. The enduring challenge for every multicellular organism is preventing individual cells from defecting, reverting back to selfish, cheating, win-lose strategies, reproducing uncontrollably without regard for the whole, which is essentially what happens when cancer emerges and threatens to destroy the entire cooperative system. Maintaining that cooperation requires constant vigilance and control mechanisms.
So how does this parallel play out in digital networks or society?
It plays out strikingly. Bitcoin's proof of work, while groundbreaking and robust in its own way, is largely a win-lose competition. And as we've discussed, that competitive pressure often leads towards centralization over time, like dominant species outcompeting others. Win-win networks, aiming for something more sustainable and equitable, need to be more like those multicellular organisms. They require far more complex rules and sophisticated mechanisms that actively incentivize cooperation and ensure benefits flow back to the collective, things like the public goods funding models, or robust, nuanced reputation systems that track cooperative behavior over time. The major hurdle, as you rightly noted earlier, is precisely this complexity. Designing and implementing these sophisticated win-win strategies is incredibly difficult. It requires higher-level organization, incredibly nuanced rules that somehow account for reputation, social relationships, long-term impact, not just immediate gain, and fostering a deep, shared cooperative ethos from the community itself. It's like trying to consciously design the genetics and developmental rules for a complex organism, but in a technological and societal context. It's a massive undertaking.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds incredibly complex to actually orchestrate, especially when you think about scaling it up to a societal level with billions of humans involved. Given all these moving parts, all these complexities, is there any realistic hope we can actually manage this level of organization to create these genuinely win-win societies? Or are we just talking about a beautiful theoretical ideal that's practically impossible? Could increasingly powerful AI be the key here? Could it manage the complexity?
That's a truly insightful question, and it's one that many experts, researchers, and technologists are actively grappling with right now. It points towards one of the most exciting and also potentially quite unnerving transformative roles for advanced technology in our future. The sheer degree of complexity required for a functioning, stable, genuinely win-win society is indeed the primary barrier. It's maybe too much for unaided human cognition and current social structures to handle effectively at scale. And our sources suggest that AI could very well be the missing piece, the key technology that might make this monumental task actually manageable. In this vision, AI wouldn't just be another tool like a spreadsheet. It could potentially act as the sophisticated nervous system and maybe even the adaptive genetic code for this higher level of societal organization we're imagining.
Okay, break that down. How could AI actually help make a win-win society function?
Well, several ways are proposed. First, AI could potentially assist in optimizing for collective benefit on a scale that was previously just unimaginable. AI systems can analyze vast multidimensional data sets about human behavior patterns, resource flows, environmental impacts, individual preferences, network effects, to identify potential win-win solutions or optimal strategies that are simply too complex for human minds or traditional committees to fully grasp on their own.
Like finding hidden synergies?
Exactly, or identifying potential negative externalities before they happen. This could include advanced algorithmic governance, where AI helps design, manage, and perhaps continuously adapt intricate rules and incentive structures within things like decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, or maybe even broader societal frameworks. And AI could potentially monitor the system in real time, proactively identifying potential collusion, detecting emerging unfair outcomes, spotting nascent centralizing forces, and perhaps even proposing countermeasures or rule adjustments for human approval.
Like a super auditor.
Kind of, yeah. It could also help optimize resource allocation, particularly for public goods. Imagine an AI managing public goods funding streams to maximize social utility, factoring in a project's likely long-term impact, community support metrics, the track record of the proposers, potential risks, making allocation far more data-driven and hopefully effective. Think of it as a potentially super efficient, perhaps impartial resource manager working for the collective benefit.
Okay, optimization. What else?
Second, AI could play a really crucial role in fostering cooperation and trust, especially in large, diverse, potentially anonymous online or global communities where traditional trust mechanisms break down. How? By helping create robust, manipulation-resistant reputation systems. These wouldn't be simple like dislike counts, but based on complex, verifiable webs of past interactions, validated contributions, peer reviews, maybe even cryptographic attestations of skills or behavior. This could allow for far more nuanced and trustworthy decision-making or delegation than simple voting systems allow.
And conflict resolution.
That too. In disputes, an AI could potentially act as an impartial third party. It could analyze data and arguments from all sides, provide unbiased, data-driven assessments, maybe even suggest fair, equitable resolutions based on predefined principles or past precedents, helping to de-escalate conflicts before they become intractable. It could function as a sort of objective, evidence-based arbiter.
Interesting. And the third way?
Third, and maybe most importantly for maintaining human agency, AI could dramatically enhance human capabilities rather than simply replacing human judgment entirely. It could augment human decision-making. Imagine an AI processing, synthesizing, and summarizing massive amounts of complex information relevant to, say, a difficult governance proposal. It could present the key arguments, potential impacts, and uncertainties in an easily digestible format, empowering all participants in a community, not just a select few experts, to make informed, data-driven choices.
So it makes complex decisions more accessible.
Exactly. It could also run incredibly sophisticated simulations of different policy choices or proposed system changes. This would allow communities to effectively test drive potential win-win strategies in a virtual environment, identify potential unintended consequences, and refine their approach before implementing it in the real world. This makes policymaking potentially much more informed, iterative, adaptive, and less risky.
Okay, that sounds incredibly powerful. But what about downsides, the risks? AI isn't magic.
Absolutely crucial to remember that. AI is a tool, not a magic wand that removes all human responsibility or ethical dilemmas. The sources are quick to point out significant potential pitfalls. Obvious risks include inherent biases creeping in from flawed or unrepresentative training data, leading the AI to perpetuate or even amplify existing inequalities. There's the infamous black box problem. If the AI's decision-making processes are too opaque and unexplainable, it can erode public trust and make accountability impossible. How do you argue with the decision you don't understand? And there's the very real potential for loss of human autonomy if too much critical decision-making is delegated to algorithms without robust checks, balances, and avenues for human override or appeal.
So we need guardrails.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Transparency, explainability, rigorous auditing for bias, and strong mechanisms for human oversight and ultimate control are critical for any kind of successful partnership where AI helps manage complexity, but humans retain the ultimate say on values, goals, and ethical direction.
Is this something people are actually working on, this intersection of AI, decentralization, complexity?
Yes, definitely. It's not just theoretical musing. This intersection of AI, decentralized systems like DAOs and blockchains, complex systems theory, and societal governance is a rapidly burgeoning area of academic research and practical experimentation. You have researchers actively exploring things like AI-powered DAOs, applying complexity science to social dynamics, and international bodies like the UN University developing ethical and governance frameworks specifically for these emerging technologies. It's a very active field.
What's really fascinating about this whole thread is how this discussion about needing AI to manage complexity for win-win strategies, it stops sounding like just a nice ideal and starts to sound almost like a necessity, especially when you factor in the sheer disruptive power of automation that's coming. The risk of concentrated power seems terrifyingly real otherwise.
That's a very astute observation, and it connects directly back to the concerns many experts are actively highlighting right now. Automation, particularly advanced AI-driven automation, if left unchecked and allowed to simply follow current raw economic incentives, risks exacerbating wealth inequality to an absolutely unprecedented degree. It could potentially concentrate immense economic and, consequently, political power in the hands of a tiny, tiny few. Against that backdrop, our sources strongly suggest that a deliberate societal shift towards designing and implementing truly win-win models is not merely a moral ideal or some utopian dream anymore. It's increasingly looking like a potential survival necessity for maintaining a stable, equitable, and democratic future.
Why is automation such a threat in that regard?
Yeah.
Don't new technologies usually create new jobs eventually?
That's been the historical pattern, yes. But there's a growing concern that this wave of automation, particularly AI, might be different. Primarily because it's increasingly acting as a direct substitute for human labor, not just an augmentor or a tool humans use. And this applies across the entire spectrum, from blue-collar manufacturing and logistics roles to white-collar administrative and data processing tasks, and now, increasingly, even many highly skilled professional and creative tasks like coding, writing, analysis, design.
AI is coming for everyone's job, basically.
Potentially a significant portion, yes. And when machines perform a task, the economic output, the value generated, the profits overwhelmingly tends to flow to the owners of those machines, the owners of the capital, rather than to the human labor that was displaced. This creates an incredibly powerful, potentially dangerous, positive feedback loop. The already wealthy can afford to acquire more automation. That automation generates more wealth for them, which allows them to acquire even more automation, further widening the gap between capital owners and everyone else.
The rich get richer exponentially.
Yeah. Exactly. The alarming risk, highlighted in several sources, is that this could lead to extreme political and economic influence wielded by a handful of trillionaires, or perhaps even down the line, quadrillionaires. Their wealth and resulting power could easily rival or even surpass that of entire national governments. This scenario risks creating a virtually unaccountable global ruling class, fundamentally threatening democratic processes, social mobility, and the overall well-being of society. It's a potential path to a new kind of techno-feudalism.
Okay, that's terrifying. So how do these win-win solutions help prevent that?
They aim to counteract that feedback loop by deliberately rewriting the rules of the economic game. To prevent this extreme consolidation, a societal imperative for win-win solutions emerges. This includes strategies like robust public goods funding and universal basic income, UBI. By capturing some of the immense productivity gains from automation, perhaps through taxes on automated systems or capital gains, and distributing those benefits broadly, ensuring everyone has a baseline of economic security society ensures that everyone shares in the prosperity, not just the owners of the machines. Paradoxically, the owners of automation might also benefit from this in the long run, through a more stable consumer base, less social unrest, and a more cohesive society. It can be framed as a win-win.
What else besides UBI?
Another strategy discussed is tax reform, specifically fundamentally rethinking how we tax capital versus labor, maybe shifting the tax burden away from human labor, making hiring people cheaper, and towards capital or automated systems. This could subtly incentivize businesses to deploy AI in ways that augment human workers, making them more productive rather than simply replacing them outright.
So guiding the direction of AI development.
Exactly. Which leads to the third point: actively promoting and funding worker augmentation technologies. Consciously directing AI research and development towards creating human-friendly tools that enhance human productivity, creativity, and capabilities, and potentially create entirely new kinds of jobs that leverage unique human skills alongside AI, rather than solely focusing on automating existing jobs out of existence.
So it's about sharing the gains.
In essence, yes. The win-win model, in this context, is all about consciously rewriting the economic and social rules to ensure that automation's immense productivity gains are broadly shared across society, actively preventing the extreme consolidation of power and wealth that might otherwise occur. It's a proactive measure against that dystopian feedback loop.
That's a truly critical challenge for society to navigate. Now, one really curious, maybe even radical possibility of this future that comes up is the idea that automation itself, the robots, the AI, could become open source. Is that a realistic scenario? And if it happened, could that truly prevent this trillionaire problem you just described? Could it democratize the means of production?
This is a highly compelling and quite visionary idea, one particularly championed by thinkers like Ray Kurzweil. It offers a potential powerful counterforce to the trillionaire problem by fundamentally altering the ownership dynamics. The core logic goes something like this. As information technology continues its exponential advance, the cost of everything that can be represented as information, including the recipe or the digital blueprints needed to create physical goods, will fall dramatically, potentially approaching zero.
The plans become free.
Essentially, yes. Think about it. Once you've digitally designed a sophisticated robotic arm, or the intricate schematics for a self-driving car, or the precise CAD files and instructions for 3D printing a complex house, copying and sharing that digital information, the design itself, costs virtually nothing. It's like discovering that the secret formula for Coca-Cola could simply be downloaded from the internet and brewed perfectly in your kitchen using common ingredients. Suddenly, proprietary monopolies based on controlling the knowledge of production become incredibly difficult, maybe impossible to maintain.
Because the knowledge is out there.
Because the knowledge itself becomes effectively free and universally accessible. Why would anyone pay a fortune to own the exclusive means of automation, the giant robot factory, if anyone, anywhere, can download the open source plans for an advanced robotic arm, a sophisticated 3D printer, the associated AI control software, and simply build one themselves, or have a local fab lab build it for them?
Okay, I see the logic. What does that future look like?
This vision points towards a future of radically decentralized manufacturing. Imagine distributed networks of highly automated production facilities. These could be anything from local community workshops equipped with versatile machines to perhaps even sophisticated fabricators right in people's homes. These facilities would produce goods on demand, customized to individual needs, using technologies like advanced additive manufacturing, 3D printing, CNC machining, and sophisticated, adaptable open-source robotics controlled by open-source AI.
But that's not where we are now, right? Automation is expensive and proprietary.
Not at all where we are now. You're absolutely right. Today's cutting-edge automation, from the robots on assembly lines to the specialized AI chips powering machine learning, is overwhelmingly proprietary, incredibly expensive to develop and acquire, and owned almost exclusively by large corporations or governments. It's deeply embedded in a centralized for-profit model with fierce intellectual property protection.
So how do we get from here to there, to open source automation?
The path requires a few key technological and cultural shifts. We're already seeing the early stages with the rise of the open source hardware movement projects like RepRap, which aims to create self-replicating 3D printers, and the widespread adoption of affordable open platforms like Arduino and Raspberry Pi that empower hobbyists and small businesses. But for true industrial-grade, highly capable open source automation, a crucial step, according to some sources, will be AI itself becoming capable of designing complex hardware schematics, automatically writing sophisticated control code for robotics, and optimizing manufacturing processes based on open data sets. If AI can automate the design of automation, it dramatically lowers the technical barriers for individuals and small groups to create and deploy advanced systems.
And that creates a win-win dynamic.
Potentially, yes. It could create the ultimate win-win dynamic described in some sources. As the marginal cost of physical production approaches zero because energy is cheap and the designs are free, traditional business models based purely on selling mass-produced physical products start to break down. Value then fundamentally shifts away from the easily replicated physical object itself and towards things like unique, creative designs, personalized experiences, building vibrant communities around open source projects, or providing specialized services. In this scenario, creators might gain reputation, social credit, maybe influence. Users get incredibly cheap and highly customizable products tailored to their exact needs, and society as a whole benefits from radically democratized means of production. This inherently distributes economic and, perhaps just as importantly, political power much more widely than the current centralized model.
But wait a minute. That sounds maybe a bit too utopian, a bit too good to be true. Couldn't big companies just use this open source strategy for their own competitive gain? Even if it looks like a win-win on the surface, couldn't it really be a win-lose move in disguise?
You're absolutely right to be skeptical, and the answer is a definite yes. Companies can, and frequently do, strategically use open sourcing, whether it's software code or hardware designs, as a sophisticated win-lose competitive maneuver. The goal isn't always pure altruism or universal benefit. Often it's about outmaneuvering competitors and securing a dominant market position.
Okay, how does that work? How can giving stuff away for free be a competitive weapon?
It works in several clever ways, and it's a common strategy, especially in the software world. And we're increasingly seeing it emerge in physical production and AI as well. First, by setting industry standards. If a powerful company open sources its core technology, especially if it's good, it encourages widespread adoption by developers and other companies. This can effectively make their technology the de facto industry standard.
Like Microsoft did with some developer tools, or Meta with AI models.
Exactly like Meta has been doing with some of its advanced AI models, like Llama. This isn't just generosity, it's a powerful strategic move. It aims to influence the entire AI ecosystem, ensuring their technological approach becomes central, that other developers build on their stack, making it harder for competitors with different, maybe closed-source approaches to gain traction.
Okay, standard setting, what else?
Second, companies leverage crowdsourced innovation. By open sourcing a core technology, they effectively tap into a massive global network of talent, thousands of external developers, engineers, researchers, who will then innovate on top of it, often much faster and cheaper than the company could internally. These external contributors find bugs, suggest improvements, develop new applications and features for the core technology. Essentially doing R&D for the original company, often at minimal direct cost. It massively accelerates their development cycle compared to closed-source rivals.
Okay, free R&D. Makes sense.
Third, open sourcing can be used to create powerful ecosystem lock-in. A company might strategically give away the core technology for free, attracting a huge user base and a vibrant developer community around it. But then they monetize effectively by selling complementary proprietary products, specialized services, or premium features that integrate seamlessly with the open source core.
Like the open core model.
Precisely. Selling specialized hardware components needed to run the open source system optimally, offering paid maintenance contracts, providing advanced proprietary software features on top of the free base, or selling cloud hosting services specifically optimized for their open source stack. The user gets the free base, which draws them in, but they end up paying for the essential or premium extras, locking them into that company's ecosystem.
Clever. Anything else?
One more, which is particularly relevant in a highly automated future. Open sourcing designs can sometimes act as a subtle scale stealing mechanism. If a company's open source design for, say, a specific type of robotic component or sensor becomes widely adopted by a large community, it dramatically increases the total global demand for the underlying raw materials or specialized subcomponents needed to build it. This increased scale drives down the manufacturing costs for those materials or subcomponents for the entire open source community, including the original company. This makes it much harder for proprietary competitors who can't leverage that same massive scale to compete effectively on price for their alternative closed source components.
Wow. So they use the community's demand to lower their own costs and squeeze rivals.
It can work that way, yes. A really fantastic real-world case study illustrating the strategic use of open source is Facebook's, now Meta's, Open Compute Project, or OCP. Years ago, Facebook designed incredibly energy-efficient and cost-effective server and data center hardware for its own massive needs. But instead of keeping these designs secret like everyone else did, they open-sourced them through OCP.
Why would they do that? Give away their advantage.
It wasn't purely altruism. It saved them enormous amounts of money in the long run. Because they open-sourced the specs, hardware vendors around the world started building servers, racks, power supplies to OCP specifications, creating competition and driving down prices for components that Facebook needed to buy in bulk. It also effectively set new industry standards for data center efficiency, forcing traditional hardware vendors like Dell or HP to adapt their own designs or risk losing market share to the more efficient, often cheaper, OCP-compliant hardware. It was a brilliant strategic win for Facebook, framed as a gift to the industry.
Okay, that's a great example. So clearly, open sourcing isn't always just about sharing. It's a powerful tool in the competitive landscape, even when the ultimate goal isn't necessarily universal benefit, but rather strategic positioning and dominance.
Precisely. It's crucial to look at the motivations and the surrounding business model when evaluating open source initiatives.
Definitely. Now, stepping back a bit, underlying this entire conversation about automation, abundance, open source, proprietary systems, all of it is energy. You can't have replicators or massive AI data centers without vast amounts of power.
Absolutely fundamental.
Is solar power alone really enough to fuel this incredibly abundant future we're imagining? Or are we inevitably talking about needing sci-fi solutions here, like pulling energy from the vacuum, zero-point energy, that kind of thing?
Yeah. That's a truly crucial question because without abundant, cheap, clean energy, frankly, none of these grand post-scarcity visions can ever materialize. It's the bedrock. Now, while visionary thinkers like Ray Kurzweil rightly champion solar power as absolutely foundational for the future, the general consensus among energy experts and in the sources we reviewed is that solar alone, at least in its current form and with current supporting tech, probably isn't enough to solve all our energy needs reliably, 247 globally.
Why not? Solar keeps getting cheaper.
It does, which is fantastic. Solar PV is an absolutely essential piece of the puzzle, maybe the biggest piece. But it has key limitations we still need to overcome, primarily intermittency.
Right. The sun doesn't shine at night.
Exactly. And cloud cover can significantly reduce output during the day. This variability means you need ways to store massive amounts of energy generated during peak sunshine hours for use when the sun isn't available. And the second big challenge is that current battery technology, while improving, likely isn't yet scalable or cost-effective enough for the kind of massive grid-level storage we'd need to power entire continents solely on intermittent renewables like solar and wind for days or weeks on end during unfavorable weather patterns. Today's batteries are still generally too expensive, don't last long enough, or rely on materials with supply chain concerns for that kind of planetary scale.
So what do we need then, besides more solar panels, if not sci-fi?
To truly fuel a globally abundant future, we need continued innovation and massive deployment of several key non-sci-fi technologies, or at least major breakthroughs in improving existing ones, working alongside solar and wind. We absolutely need advanced batteries technologies going far beyond today's lithium-ion. Researchers are actively exploring things like solid-state batteries, flow batteries, sodium-ion, iron-air, and other chemistries that promise potentially cheaper, safer, longer-lasting, and more scalable grid storage solutions using more abundant materials. We also need to deploy other forms of grid-level energy storage at scale, technologies that can store power for longer durations, days or weeks, or at truly massive capacities. Things like advanced pumped hydro storage, using reservoirs at different elevations, compressed air energy storage, CAES, underground, various forms of thermal energy storage, storing heat in molten salt rocks, and perhaps green hydrogen production and storage. And managing the grid itself. Hugely important. We'll need incredibly smart grids, likely managed by sophisticated AI, capable of intelligently balancing energy supply and demand in real time across vast networks with millions of distributed energy sources. Everything from utility-scale solar and wind farms to rooftop solar panels on homes, batteries and electric vehicles plugged into the grid, V2G, industrial batteries, and flexible demand from smart appliances. This allows for much greater efficiency and resilience.
Anything else?
One often underestimated but incredibly crucial technology is the widespread adoption of highly efficient heat pumps for heating and cooling buildings. Temperature control is a massive chunk of global energy demand. Heat pumps are far more efficient than traditional furnaces or electric resistance heating, so deploying them universally could drastically reduce overall energy consumption, making the transition to renewables much easier and cheaper.
Okay, so lots of real tech needed. What about those sci-fi ideas like zero-point energy? Any hope there?
Yeah, it's important to address those because they pop up. While zero-point energy, or ZPE, is a fascinating real concept in theoretical quantum physics relating to the background energy of the vacuum, even at absolute zero temperature. The idea of actually extracting useful net positive over unity energy from it, meaning getting more energy out than you put in to run the extraction device, essentially creating a perpetual motion machine, is currently not supported by mainstream physics.
So no free energy from the vacuum.
Not according to our current understanding. The law of conservation of energy remains one of the most fundamental and well-tested pillars of physics. Devices claiming over-unity operation are generally viewed with extreme skepticism in the scientific community, often falling into the category of pseudoscience.
Okay, got it. Stick to the real stuff.
Right. So solar is absolutely foundational, maybe the cornerstone, but it needs significant continued breakthroughs and massive deployment of advanced storage, grid management, energy efficiency technologies, and potentially other clean, firm power sources like next-gen geothermal or nuclear, not speculative physics, to reliably achieve its full potential for powering a truly abundant global future.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a huge engineering challenge. But let's say we can overcome the formidable technical hurdles, the energy, the automation, the AI. What about the political ones?
Yes, maybe the hardest part.
Our current governments, our political systems, they seem deeply entrenched. They're built on managing scarcity, on existing power structures, on slow, incremental change. How do they possibly adapt to something as radical as widespread abundance and open source production? It feels like they're designed for a different world.
This is indeed a major, maybe even the major, hurdle identified in the sources. Political inertia, the sheer difficulty of implementing large-scale systemic change through existing political processes, is an incredibly significant challenge. Because you're absolutely right. Our current political systems, virtually worldwide, are fundamentally built around managing a scarcity-based economy. Think about what occupies most governments' time and resources. Economic regulation, managing inflation and unemployment, wealth distribution through complex tax systems, protecting intellectual property rights, negotiating international trade deals based on comparative advantage, managing resource competition, even geopolitics often revolves around control of scarce resources like oil or critical minerals. The entire apparatus is geared towards scarcity.
So it's resistant to abundance.
Inherently resistant to radical change, yes. Especially because powerful lobbies and deeply vested interests, particularly corporations benefiting from current scarcity-based models and employing win-lose strategies, will inevitably fight tooth and nail to protect the status quo, to maintain their advantages, their monopolies, their control over resources or information.
They won't give up power easily.
History suggests not. However, if a truly open source, post-scarcity world where basic needs are met largely through automated decentralized systems were to somehow emerge and become dominant, then the role of government could potentially undergo a profound transformation. It might shift dramatically away from detailed top-down economic control and regulation towards more fundamental roles of enablement and protection.
What would that look like?
Instead of primarily regulating ownership, controlling markets, and managing finite resources, governments might focus more on building and maintaining the essential public infrastructure needed for this new abundant era to function safely and equitably. Think things like ensuring robust, secure, open-source energy grids, guaranteeing universal access to high-speed communication networks, perhaps funding foundational AI research for public benefit, fostering standards for interoperability between different open-source automation platforms. They'd be less about controlling commerce and more about enabling collaboration and innovation for the collective good.
And what about their other roles, like safety nets?
Their primary focus could then shift much more strongly towards crucial areas like ensuring safety and ethical standards for powerful open source automation, making sure that self-replicating fabricators or autonomous AI systems are safe and don't cause harm, much like we regulate food safety or drug efficacy today. And critically, they would likely play a key role in ensuring a universal baseline of economic security for all citizens, perhaps by administering a robust UBI funded by the immense productivity gains of automation, as we discussed. This would effectively remove the crushing political pressure of needing to create jobs constantly and dealing with mass unemployment or economic anxiety. It could free up society's collective energy to focus on other, perhaps more meaningful pursuits, fostering creativity, scientific exploration, community building, addressing higher-order human needs.
That sounds simpler in a way, but getting there.
But the transition, the political transition itself is the biggest challenge. That trillionaire problem we talked about, the potential for extreme concentration of wealth and power in the short to medium term as automation ramps up before these win-win systems are in place, could make it incredibly difficult for governments to actually implement the very policies needed to steer towards a more equal open source future. Those entrenched interests, benefiting massively from the initial stages of automation under the old rules, will likely use their influence to resist policies that democratize the means of production or broadly redistribute automation's benefits. Overcoming that political inertia and the concentrated power of those who benefit most from scarcity is the crucial, perhaps existential challenge.
It really is. This whole picture is incredibly fascinating, but it does make you wonder, who's actually going to lead the charge into this open source future? Is it going to bubble up from grassroots movements? Or could a major global player actually catalyze this change, maybe even strategically, rather than waiting for a slow, uncertain organic shift?
That's a highly insightful question, and the answer, perhaps surprisingly to some, is that it might already be happening to a significant degree, driven by strategic national interests rather than pure ideology. China, for instance, is increasingly positioned, according to several analyses, to play a pivotal, perhaps even dominant catalytic role in leading the development and global adoption of open source automation.
Really? China? Isn't their system usually seen as more top-down, more state-controlled?
It is in many ways, but their embrace of open source, particularly in strategic technology sectors, appears to be accelerating rapidly. And it's not necessarily driven by altruism or a belief in decentralized philosophy. It seems to be a deeply strategic move driven by several key geopolitical and economic rationales.
Okay, what are those rationale?
First, there's a very strong imperative for technological self-reliance. Facing escalating export controls and restrictions on accessing cutting-edge foreign technology, particularly from the U.S., especially in areas like advanced semiconductors and AI.
Right, the tech tensions.
Exactly. China aims to reduce its dependency on potentially unreliable foreign tech supply chains. Open source technology, by its very nature, the code, the designs being publicly available, cannot be easily sanctioned or restricted in the same way proprietary technology can. Adopting and contributing to open source becomes a powerful tool for ensuring national technological sovereignty.
Okay, self-reliance. Makes sense.
Second, open source enables incredibly rapid innovation and catch-up. Instead of reinventing the wheel in fiercely protected, closed R&D labs, Chinese companies and researchers can learn from, build upon, and contribute back to the vast pool of global open source technology. This allows them to potentially leapfrog traditional, often lengthy and expensive R&D cycles in critical areas. We're already seeing this happen, for example, with leading Chinese tech firms releasing highly advanced open source AI models that are incredibly competitive, sometimes even state-of-the-art on a global scale. They learn fast, iterate fast, and share fast within that ecosystem.
So it accelerates their progress.
Dramatically. Third, it's potentially about setting global standards. By developing and releasing high-quality, widely usable open-source technology, whether it's AI frameworks, robotic operating systems, or hardware designs, China can subtly influence and even help establish new global industry standards based on their contributions and approaches. This shifts the competitive landscape away from purely proprietary systems, where specific Western companies might currently dominate, towards underlying widely adopted open standards. This levels the playing field in some ways, but can also confer significant advantages, like ecosystem familiarity and influence, to those who heavily shape the open standard.
And fourth.
And finally, there's just pragmatic economic calculation. Embracing open source can dramatically reduce R&D and implementation costs for countless domestic businesses, from small startups to large corporations. It democratizes access to cutting-edge tools within China, fueling a more vibrant, dynamic, and innovative domestic ecosystem.
How does this apply specifically to automation?
Well, China is already investing massively in areas crucial for open source automation. For example, supporting the development and adoption of open source chip architectures like RISC-V, which provides a viable alternative to proprietary designs from companies like ARM or Intel. They are also investing heavily in mass-producing increasingly sophisticated humanoid robots and industrial robots, often leveraging open-source software components. This could position China to become a dominant global supplier of affordable, capable open-source robotic hardware and components in the near future.
So how does China doing this catalyze global development? Does it force others to follow?
It very well could act as a powerful catalyst, yes, primarily through forced competition. As Chinese companies release high-quality, capable open-source technology like AI models or robot designs, often for free or very low cost, Western companies, which have long relied on proprietary technology and high margins for their competitive advantage, may find themselves compelled to open-source more of their own innovations simply to remain relevant and competitive in a rapidly changing global market.
Like Meta open sourcing Llama, partly in response to Chinese models.
That's certainly part of the dynamic many analysts point to, yes. It creates a kind of competitive race to open source, or at least a race to leverage open source effectively. The broader effect is a global democratization of advanced technology. China's strategic push lowers the barriers to entry for advanced AI and automation for small businesses, startups, researchers, and even individuals worldwide. This could lead to an explosion of innovation, experimentation, and potentially more decentralized production globally as these powerful tools become much more accessible.
So China's strategic choices could inadvertently push the whole world faster towards this open, abundant future.
It's a distinct possibility. China's strategic embrace of open source, driven by its own complex mix of geopolitical and economic factors, could fundamentally reshape the global technological landscape. It might accelerate the shift towards a more open and potentially more decentralized future for automation, perhaps much faster than would happen otherwise, whether other nations initially choose to embrace that path or not. It's a fascinating, powerful, and slightly unpredictable lever of global change. #TagTagOutro.
Okay, wow. So what does this all really mean for us, for you listening? We've taken a really deep dive today into a future where scarcity, that thing that has driven human history, might no longer be the defining principle of our daily lives. We've explored how economics itself, the very fabric of our motivations, the whole concept of ownership, and even the fundamental role of government could radically transform. It's a potential shift from managing what's limited to, orchestrating what's abundant, what's meaningful, and what remains uniquely human. It's a future that seems to promise almost unimaginable comfort and freedom from want, but it also clearly demands an entirely new way of thinking about human purpose, about what drives us.
That's really the core of it, isn't it? Ultimately, as a society, we may indeed master matter and energy. We might achieve a level of material abundance that would seem absolutely miraculous, like magic to previous generations. But that profound, enduring question, what truly matters most, that will always remain ours as humans to answer. You may find yourself living in a world where you don't technically need money to live comfortably, but you will still absolutely need meaning to thrive. And meaning, in any age, whether scarcity or abundance, isn't usually given freely. It seems to be something that is earned, something discovered through contribution, through passion, through connection, through the unique, non-replicable stamp you choose to leave on an increasingly abundant world.
So as you go about your day-to-day, maybe thinking about what you might choose to create or contribute or learn, consider this. What kind of meaning will you pursue when the fundamental rules of the economic game might be changing so dramatically around us? What will you choose to build or explore or share with the world when you no longer have to worry quite so much about simply surviving? What becomes important then?